Welcome back to the 14th Jaipur Literature Festival. We're here live at Digi Palace at the magnificent Darbar Hall, protected by Dettol. It's our pleasure to present today Food for the Soul. Mohana Gill and Tanya Abraham in conversation with Suvir Saran. Nature provides in abundance. We too are part of nature and designed to draw sustenance from it. In this session, award-winning author Mohana Gill, whose cookbooks encourage healthy eating practices, author, art curator, and mental health advocate Tanya Abraham, and Michelin star chef and writer Suvir Saran talk about natural foods and produce, healthy living, and the benefits of fresh cooking, while also looking at how food is a reflection of communities, histories, and identities, and holds up a mirror to our souls. Mohana Gill is a multi-award winning author whose cookbooks encourage healthy eating habits. Her books have won the Gourmand World Cookbook Awards and other awards as well. She writes books for adults and children, focusing on educating, creating awareness, and informing readers about the benefits of natural food. Tanya Abraham is an author and an art curator based in Kochi. She's also the founder of the Art Outreach Society, a not-for-profit that works with the arts for mental health and innovative thinking. She worked as the creative director of Kashi Art Gallery in Kochi and has recently founded Kula, a platform for public art and creative expression. Suvir Saran has been regarded as a legend in New York City's food circles, having garnered a Michelin star at Devi, a first for Indian cuisine in North America. He recently released his fourth book, Instamatic, a chef's deeper, more thoughtful look into today's Insta world. Do remember to comment by typing it into the comment section below. Ladies and gentlemen, food for the soul. Mohana Gill, Tanya Abraham, in conversation with Suvir Saran. Suvir, over to you.
Mohana and Tanya, what a lucky man I am to wake up on Sunday morning with you next to me. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Suvir.
So, Mohana, going to you first. Mohana, at 84 or nearing 84, do you think food really can nourish the soul? Is there a connection to what we eat and who we are?
Yes, I think so. I think food is one of the most important things in our lives for everybody. And I think we need food not only for our body, but also to nourish our souls. So I think that it's very important that we eat the kind of food or the healthy foods which would both nourish our souls as well as our body. And as you know, that my main area of interest is children. So I'm even more interested in nourishing the body and souls of children, because I think that they are our future and we really need to nourish them so that, we will have a new generation of healthy and happy children. So I think it's very, very important. Yes.
And Tanya, when I look at Kerala, you're from Kochi. Does Kerala have a soul with all those different cultures, people, religions, races, all making home in Kerala? Do we have one soul? Do we have many disparate souls? Is there hope for Kerala? What do you think of Kerala? People call it a melting pot. I call it a mosaic. How do you look at it?
You're absolutely right. It is a melting pot and a mosaic. And I think it's one soul made of many souls, like consciousness, So when you look at Kerala, it is one personality that comes alive because of foods from different communities and religions and people across the globe, the kind of impact that food and culture has had on us here. It's amazing.
And Mohana, in your experience over the years, do you think religion, community, tradition play a very important and significant role in what we eat and how we present it?
I think that when we are talking about food, in my experience, I think there are no boundaries for food. So there's no religion, there's no tradition. I think food is something that everybody enjoys. And I think when we live in a country like Malaysia, which is diverse, we've got our Chinese and we've got our Indians, we've got our Malays and all kinds of people, we enjoy everybody's food. And I think when it comes to food, I really don't think we make that kind of differentiation.
So I totally wholeheartedly concur with that. But isn't food a very strong part of community? And our communities would be nothing if they didn't have the individuality of the different races, religions that they represent. And especially when I see it in Malaysia, but also in Kerala. Tanya, how do you all deal with it in Kerala? Because you have an incredibly rich Christian, Muslim, and Hindu community, and Jewish, all living quite harmoniously. How does food play into that, Tanya, in the Kerala concept?
Well, Suvir, I believe that food tells stories which are untold. It tells histories which are untold, things that we don't realize otherwise. If we unearth food identities, I think we can come to know people very closely and very, the intricacies of food are so vivid in Kerala that we really understand how people can live not just harmoniously, but as supporters of the other. Because we eat food which is not just, I've been brought up as a Catholic, as a Christian, but I don't know Catholic per se, Catholic food. We eat all kinds of food. We share our food. And that's a very important aspect, because if we're not able to share each other's soul and share our identities as human beings, then everything stops there. And food is something we can't say no to, right? Being a chef, you would realize how creative it is to dish up different kinds of cuisines and flavors and things like that. So in Kerala, I think the beauty is we embrace each other, we accept each other, and food really represents that. And sorry, go ahead.
No, I agree with you. Mohana, coming to you in Malaysia, you are working with children, you're working with fruits and vegetables, you are teaching the young to be mindful. What is that unique ingredient that's not culinary, that is keeping Malaysia this, they say Malaysia simply Asia. You can find all Asians in Malaysia, and Malaysian cuisine represents the many flavors and spices and scents and tastes from all across Asia. What is it that makes Malaysia so special that young kids coming of age in Malaysia will think, you know what, I'm first Malaysian, then something else, but primarily the foods of Malaysia are all mine? How does it work, Mohana?
Because I think when the children are very small, they're exposed to different kinds of foods. So we eat, when you go out, you eat the food, whatever you cook at home, and then you have the street food, and then we have the other kinds of food. So when I talk about healthy food for our children, and basically I am interested in fruits and vegetables, then in Malaysia, as you know, Malaysia is a country that is abundant in fruits. We have so many different kinds of fruits all year round. So I encourage the children, to eat more of our local fruits and vegetables. And I also feel, Suvir, that I think it is better for the children to understand the kind of food that their country produces and the goodness of that food, because that is so much more easily available. And I think that by the time even the 4 or 5 year olds, they all know Chinese food, Indian food, Malay food, and cooked in different cuisines and in different ways, but perhaps maybe using more of our local fruits and vegetables.
And Mohana, what is it about local fruits and vegetables that makes them special? Are they more flavorful? Are they seasonally more inspiring? Are they connected to stories that people have grown up with? Why local? Well, in a world that's so globalized, why are you teaching your kids to respect, admire, and celebrate the local?
Because I think that what we locally produce, and when we consume that food has much more nutritional value. That fruit is much more tastier. Sometimes I think we get caught up with getting fruits from Africa or getting fruit from Australia and so on and so forth. But I sometimes think that those fruits traveling such a long way might even suffer a little bit from jet lag, I think,
How
and
beautifully
lose a little bit of their nutrition. Whereas if we use fruits that we produce in our own country, and also the fruits that are in season, then I think those fruits and vegetables are more more tasty. They are much more fresh, and I think when you prepare, they're much more delicious. That's why I try to, and also I think it is important for children to understand and appreciate what is grown in their country.
it also supports the local economy,
That's
your
yes,
neighbors. So it's an ecosystem you've created.
that's right.
Talking
Yes,
about. So, Tanya, now that we know that local and regional is important,
Mhm.
Kerala, we see a lot of that. We see Malaysia being mimicked in another way. Just Kerala is very rich from the geotopography of the land to the architecture, the contrasting languages that play a role there. What do you think is the place and the nuance that local, regional, and sustainable might be playing in Kerala? And who owns them? Who owns the narrative? Is it a Christian local, Muslim local, Hindu local, or how is it defined in the Kerala landscape?
That's an interesting question, and I think it kind of summarizes your question, sort of brings to focus what the book that I have written is all about, where food is culture, and everything stems from really, your heart and your soul. And Kerala is one region where we've had, a history because of its spices, and because of the spices, we've had traders and conquerors from across the globe searching for black gold or pepper or the economic value of it, which brought to Kerala and enormous influences. From Arabia, from Europe, from the regions of Mediterranean, and we've even had communities settling down here. So the idea of the local narrative is not very contained. It expands. It expands into various cultures. And if there's one thing which has survived, I'm talking about centuries and centuries. We've had the Jews arriving even before Christ. That's more than 2,000 years ago to the shores of Kerala. It's food, because food is something that cannot live without people, and people can't live without food. And our identities are very closely and intricately linked to it. It becomes the fabric of who we are. And so if you look at Kerala, I think the local is a very expanded term. And we as Keralites don't have a particular cuisine in the sense that this alone is Kerala cuisine. But in my book, what was fascinating for me while I was researching is that there are cuisines which really haven't found space in popularity, simply because they were very small communities. But the kind of cultural amalgamation that is the foundation of it is simply amazing. And
And,
that's the reason why, I kind of decided to get the book published.
and what kind of small cuisine that perhaps didn't find larger representation are you talking about? Can you share with us some of these very localized and very micro cuisines that you're talking about?
Right. So there are 6 communities that I have referred to in my book, and the mapla, or the cuisine which came from the Arabs, is very popular. The Syrian Christian cuisine is very popular. Everybody knows about that. But Christianity came to Kerala. Well, it's as old as Christ itself, or Christianity itself. But when Catholicism came, which is somewhere around the 15th, 16th century, the kind of influence the Portuguese had is tremendous on Kerala. And they came here before Goa, and most people don't know that. They went to Goa much later from Kerala. So when we talk about Christianity, there were various sects of Christians or Catholics who came from that influence. My parents come from 2 different Christian Catholic communities. And so it was very in my face that this very subtle difference is there. And the difference happens because of the spices. So my paternal family is Latin Catholics, more of a lineage towards the Portuguese tradition, while my mother is Syrian Catholic. We also have the Anglo-Indians, which is they're very different from the Anglo-Indians you find in Calcutta or Bombay, because we have those who have a very strong historical lineage to the Portuguese. And the kind of cuisine that is produced by them, that is produced by the Latin Catholics, is different. I'm not saying they're starkly different, but just the way the ingredients are married changes cuisines. I mean, you know that.
Give us an example.
I'm sorry?
Could you give us an example?
Yes, sure. It's something I always talk about because I grew up in a little ancient town called Fort Kochi, which is famous now for the Biennale. And 2 streets away is where the Anglo-Indian community is. And of course, very few of them are left now. But the Vindaloo, for example, is different. The way the Latins make it and the way the Anglo-Indians make it is different. If you look at the Syrians and the Latins, we have the famed mean polichada, the one that you have in the banana leaf. The Latins don't make it spicy. We only use pepper and green chili. We don't use red chili, while the Syrians have all of the masalas. But it's the same name. It's the same dish at the end of it, but the taste is completely different. The same technique of cooking, but the taste and the product is different. And we have a kind of amalgamation, which is very interesting because red chilies came in because of the Portuguese. Yeah, and pepper was already here in Kerala. So what one chooses kind of, I think, decides what the final dish is all about.
Yeah, thank you. Mohana, do you use pepper in your cooking?
Yeah, we use a little bit of pepper. We do.
Which one do you use? Do you use black, red, the pepper, or it's pepper nigrum, the black pepper of India? Which one do you use more?
Actually, Malaysia we produce our own pepper as well. So in a lot of our cooking, we use the pepper that is, it comes from Sabah, Sarawak, I think. And so we use our own pepper. But we also, because everything is available, so sometimes I think it depends on the availability. If we can't get our local one, then we will use from India or different parts of the world.
And you are using what we call the chili peppers, the red ones, green ones, yellow, orange, the colorful vegetable peppers. Do you use those in your cooking?
Yes, we do. Yes, we do.
No, they're not Malaysian. So how do we tell those kids to eat local when we are using... In India, we use peppers like there's no tomorrow. And we forget that they came to India through Kerala with the Portuguese. And we've forgotten that, they're not really local. So how do you deal with that, Mohana? That what we think of as local is often a paradigm that keeps stretching as humans travel, as humans explore, as humans embrace the other, accept and celebrate and, enjoy the other. So where do we put a stop in saying what is local? Because often what is local wasn't local just a few decades or generations ago. How do you deal with that?
I think when I'm talking about local, I basically talk about what we produce in our own country, right? So I think we are also producing now the green pepper and the orange pepper and the red pepper. So technically that becomes then part of the local cuisine, And similarly, there are so many other vegetables and fruits that originally perhaps came from somewhere else. But because we are growing them now in Malaysia, whether it's tomatoes or whether it's cauliflower or whatever, right? So that, I suppose when I talk about local, that means all of what our children can see when they go to the supermarket. Those are although we do have vegetables and fruit from other countries, but basically what we produce in our own country.
And that's a beautiful thing you've illustrated. I knew the answer for me was that. I'm glad to hear you say the same. So I think when we talk about local, Mohana, for you, it means supporting a local economy.
That's correct.
Or celebrating the freshness that you get when you're not going too far, when you're plucking a fruit and vegetable in season, so that they're at ripest and their taste, their scent, their sweetness, their sourness is all at peak. So that means local to you. You're not creating boundaries of what is local. You're just saying support the local economy.
That's correct. Yeah, that is correct. And of course, we have lots of places in the Cameron Highlands and other places where we grow even like strawberries and so many other fruits, So we try as far as possible, because I find that those are much more tasty than when the ones that come from Korea or wherever they come from. And I think children need to understand. And sometimes I think it's also a good idea, because when you talk to a child, Suvir, and you ask him, where does your pineapple come from? He will tell you supermarket, because he does not know. He does not know. They think everything that they eat comes from the supermarket. So I also think that by talking about local, and in my books, for example, I show how the pineapple tree grows. And so the children then have an idea that is where the pineapple comes from, or that is where the green pepper comes from. So visually also they can see. And I think also, as you know, when the children, it's very important for them to look at a fruit and vegetable and see the colors of it, to make sure that it is more attractive and it is more palatable for them. Yeah.
Do you think we all eat with our eyes before we eat with our mouths?
Very much so, because I know I have a 5-year-old Suvir. So when you put food on the table for him and he looks at the food first, and if he sees those lovely colors, and then he can see the green and he can see the red, and he can point out what it is. But if you put a blob, I think, in front of him, that, then he probably may not look at it. Very much so.
Mohana, you just said something to me that makes you even more of a superwoman than I already thought you were. So you said you have a 5-year-old. Did you deliver your last child at 79?
Something like that, yes. Suvir, all my boys are in their 50s.
So this is a grandchild.
Yes, this is my grandson. Yes.
How many grandchildren do you have, Mohana?
I have 2 grandchildren. Haley, who I use for all my books, that's my little granddaughter, who now is 14. But when I started to write Haley, she was about 2 or 3 years old. And then I have this little fella now who is 5.
And is there a special language that one employs when talking to kids about food, when talking about seasonality, regionality, ripeness, firmness? How do you get a child interested in the finer nuance of a local vegetable versus a cold storage vegetable that's traveled 3,000 miles to get to you?
Well, I think that we need to get our children involved. So to understand, so like my 5-year-old, right? I will take him and I'll show him. And I'll show him and tell him that this is a pepper and this comes from Malaysia, or this is another vegetable or another fruit. And I think they learn by seeing and by tasting the food as well. Because even a 4-5-year-old, they have very, very distinct tastes. And they know, the sweet and the sour and the whatever. And I think also the other thing is the senses is very important, right? To be able to smell the food, the vegetable, to be able to touch, to see what it is like. So I think that's what I try to do in my books, to teach the children all these little things, so that they when they look at a vegetable or a fruit, they look at it and say, well, this is good for me, or this is, without being too technical, without going into the great nutritional value. But when we're sitting and eating together, then we point out to them and say, that this particular vegetable is good for you, or this is more tasty. So I think for me, and through my books, involvement of the children is very important. That is the reason why all the books have got recipes, very, very simple recipes that the children can try by themselves or together. And I think for me, togetherness, to be able to do things together, the parents and the children enjoying food together, cooking together, eating together, and talking about the food. I think that is very important.
How beautiful. I always say families that eat together will stay happier together.
I agree with you.
Summed it up very beautifully. And so that takes me to Tanya. Tanya, you wrote in your book, between stone jars of pickles, the smell of firewood and burning coal stood my grandmother. So that's such a beautiful imagery you painted with words about your grandmother. Where was she from? Was she Christian like you are? Was she perhaps from another community but married into the Christian community? And what were the special dishes that she made for you when you were a child that still sing and dance in your mind's landscape?
You've gotten me quite emotional there, Zubir. Yes, she was Christian just like the rest of the family. I think at that point in time, you don't have much of an option but to have your marriage arranged. Um, but she came from a very small town, and when she came to a place like Fort Kochi, it was a time when the British were ruling there. It was known as British Cochin, and it meant an exposure to an enormous new world of various kinds of cuisines, cultures, the way people cooked and ate and drank and everything. So for me, the book really came from her kitchen, which in Portuguese, Malayalam, is called cozinha. And yeah, she made all kinds of food, Subi. She made food from her book of Mrs. Beeton, which was gifted to her by a British friend. She made food which was very local, very Latin Catholic. She made food which was Syrian Christian. So, she was this wonderful amalgamation of flavors and in a very different kind of way. And it reminds me of Rumi when you mentioned this. It says that the heart is cooking a pot of food, and that we have to be patient regarding that. And that really sums up for me the kind of woman she was. Yeah.
And as you reflect on your grandmother, can you think about what one major change has influenced Kerala cuisine in the last several decades? Is there something that stands out? Something that has changed drastically, that has perhaps gotten better or perhaps has been lost?
I think it's time. The fact that people don't have time anymore, including me, to dedicate ourselves to elaborate cooking. And that changes techniques. And when techniques have changed, of course, flavors change.
Of course. And so Kerala has become very globalized, if not for any reason, but for the work population, the population that works outside of Kerala and brings both money and ideas back into the Kerala landscape. Food has been transformed from traditional to fusion. Where would you place Kerala cuisine on the global food landscape right now? What is it? What's the face of Kerala food today?
I believe we are very distinct with our cuisine. It's something we're very possessive about as Keralites. It's food, is our food and our cuisines, and the way our taste buds are very, very strong with regards to what we enjoy, because I think it reminds us of the past. It reminds us of families and our mothers and our grandmothers, and really it's soul for our food. So from the kind of changes that have happened over the years, I think you might have a food festival, or you might have a menu at a restaurant which is providing something different, and you might have people experimenting at home. But the heart of it, really, I don't think has changed at all.
So Mohana, bringing you back in here from Kerala, which hasn't changed much while changing a lot. When you cook for your children, for your grandchildren, when you cook to teach kids about the freshness and magic of fruits and vegetables, of a plant-based diet, what 4 or 5 dishes can you tell us about that will bring kids in rather than go out towards those pizzas and hamburgers and junk food that they're craving because of a $7 billion marketing industry pushing bad food on them?
Well, I think for our children, we need to show them the dish that you are going to make, which looks good. For example, I do a fruit pizza, which all children love pizza, right? So instead of doing the normal pizza, we use a watermelon pizza. So you cut the watermelon, and that is the base of your pizza. And then we get the children to say, you can use whatever topping you want. So you can use yogurt, and then you can put raisins on it, and then you can put nuts, and you can to make it a little bit more Malaysian, we will use coconut on it and maybe a little bit of gula melaka. So I think that visually, these are some of the dishes that I prepare so that it attracts our children. And of course, don't forget, watermelon is available in Malaysia all year round. So you can pick it up anytime you like. Similarly, like if we use banana, for example, banana in pajamas. So again, dipped in chocolate, so then the children will be able to enjoy. So these are some of the things that I use. Then we do some very nice, simple smoothies, which, all the banana and maybe strawberries and maybe blueberries, so any kind. And then we use maybe some local coconut water instead of using plain water. So that's how I try to entice our children to. But don't forget, Subir, that I come originally from Burma. So a lot of my thinking and my cuisine also is influenced by what I learned as a child from my mother. So even when I'm cooking today, a little bit of that, some little bit here, there, and a little bit there, I add and I chop and I change and try to come up with something that is more palatable and something which our children will enjoy.
How wonderful. And Mohana, is there one vegetable or fruit that evokes a special memory? Even at 84, it takes you back to perhaps Burma or to your grandmother. Is that one fruit or vegetable that comes alive when you're nostalgic and homesick?
I think I'm talking about the custard apple.
How wonderful.
The custard apple, yes. Because, it's a delicious fruit, but I also find it, I always call it's a very frustrating fruit because you have to, because you eat for so little, and then you have this whole lot of seeds. And it's also very nostalgic because when we were growing up in Burma, apart from eating the custard apple, we used to save all the seeds. As you know, the seeds are like blackish and brownish, and we used to play with those seeds. So that becomes part of, so I think that is one of the things that I remember. Yeah. And for vegetable, it is the drumstick, the moringa. Moringa. Which we grow in our own garden, and the fruit of the drumstick, as well as the flowers. Flowers are very, very delicious and very nutritious. So I think these are,
Thank you for sharing. So, Tanya, to you, is there a particular fruit or a vegetable that not only evokes special memories, but also is your bond with grandma or your mother?
Well, there are too many to mention. But I think the banana, it's so, it's so part of our cuisine. And then we take it and make a curry, or we make a fritter, or we make an appam with it. It's a very versatile fruit that can be played with. And it's very, very local, right? There was plenty of banana planted available from the backyard. So I think for me, it is the banana, yes.
And is there a particular food, if you weren't on talking with me and Mohana about food for soul, what would you be eating this Sunday morning for lunch or brunch or breakfast?
For myself, it'll be my dal and chawal. That is my comfort food. Because when I was growing up, when you woke up in the morning, you could smell, the whole house was permeated with the smell of dal that was being boiled in the kitchen. And in those days, because we didn't have pressure cookers and things like that, so it took hours for the dal to cook. So that was always cooking in the kitchen, and you could get, so even today, I enjoy different kinds of food, but I reach a stage where I just want to sit down and have a plate of just nice dal with rice and maybe with a little bit of yogurt and perhaps a vegetable.
And what do you put in your dal? What spices do you put in your dal?
Well, if I make the tur dal, then of course, tomatoes, and then there will be a lot of little bit of jeera, a little bit of turmeric, and a little bit of chili powder, and lots of onions, ginger, and garlic, that kind of a tadka. And yeah, so
How wonderful. Now you're making me hungry for dal and chawal. And Tanya, what are you craving on this Sunday morning? What would you be eating if you weren't chatting with us?
Well, Sunday morning, since I remember, has always been putta and ish stew. So we say ish stew for stew, and it's usually chicken or a meat which is a favorite of the family, or mutton or whatever it is, and it's had with putta, which is very popular. It's a steamed rice cake kind of a thing, and that is a mandatory thing for Sunday. You don't start your Sunday without that.
And do you drink something with it that's local? What?
Not really, not really. Yeah.
And Tanya, do you have a family that?
Yeah. Yes, my parents are still very healthy and happy, and they live in Fort Kochi. I live with my son. I'm a single mother. I live with my son in.
How old is he?
He's 23.
wow.
23.
Yeah.
Wow, how wonderful. And what
Wow.
are his favorite foods for Sunday?
Sunday is putta and stew. And when he just graduated, and when he was in the United States, he used to tell me, "I'm craving for the for putta and stew." And I remember this one time, my mother and I carried all the ingredients there so we could make it for him.
Yeah. And so, Mohana, bringing you back into this conversation, as we have just a few more minutes left, what do you think about the politicization of food? How people think they own a certain kind of food or a fruit or a vegetable. When I think of food, be it pizza or a dal, I think it belongs to the world, not to one community. Because once you've cooked it, it's there to be shared. Once you put it at a table, whoever's eaten it can then make it for themselves because they are inspired by it. What do you think about food politics?
I don't think that's a very good idea. We still have this problem because, like, we in even in Malaysia and Singapore, we fight and we say that this is a Singaporean and this is Malaysian. But actually, when you look at food, like you said, once it is in front of you, it is universal. Everybody eats it and everybody enjoys it. But I guess that for a lot of people, for want of something better to do, they would like to use food and use it and then say that this belongs to this country or this belongs to that country. But I think even if you take a food that belongs to a particular country, when we take it ourselves and we cook it, it becomes ours because we are putting into that not only our love, our energy, but as well as a little bit of change here and there. So then that becomes our food. But I guess when we live in this kind of a world, what can we say?
Yeah. So thank you for saying that, giving us that beautiful answer for Dimple. And now I have Pippa asking Tanya. Tanya, you're an art curator and a historian. What inspired you to dive into the history of Kerala kitchens? And do you think cooking with all its ingredients as an art, that it should be learned by other people? Is it an art form to you as a curator?
Of course, absolutely. I think cooking is really creativity for the soul. And in fact, during the lockdown, I worked on an art project based on cooking. And then we had people taking part in the project from their homes. And I've had artists actually creating installations based on what we found. So definitely, it's all part of creativity and how we see art.
So when your 23-year-old son was young,
Mm-hmm.
what tricks were you doing that may be similar to what Mohana has done for her children and grandchildren?
Nothing. He's such a foodie. He came
But
out.
you make him a foodie.
He
He
is
didn't come out of nowhere. He didn't come out to vacuum. What did you do as a mother? Did you cook every day? Did you love food yourself? How did you turn your son into a foodie?
Both his grandmothers cook or cooked, because one of them is no more. They both fed him, I think, every possible delicious food that he can imagine. So I can't take much credit for that. But yes, I did cook for him, and he loves to experiment. So I'm really thankful I didn't have to force feed at any time.
How beautiful. So Mohana, you, the grandmother, are doing the same thing. Do you think that if we as parents, neighbors, grandparents, elders, as citizens of this 21st century world, put more time into cooking, our kids and our neighbors' kids and our future is going to be much better and more exciting?
I think so, wholeheartedly. I really think that we need to go back to the kitchen, to go back and think of what our mothers and grandmothers cooked, how they fed us. And I think in this day where everybody's so busy, so we're doing so many things, they don't have time. But then again, at this particular point, because we have the COVID, there are parents who are at home with their children. And I think that a lot of parents are finding a little bit more time to share the food with them and cook with them and eat with them.
Yeah. So Mohana, there's a lady called Jessica asking you for a quick recipe. We have only 1 minute for a delicious alternative to Maggi.
Just the local noodles, and you just stir fry it very, very, very fast with a little bit of onion, ginger, and garlic, and add in a little bit of soy sauce maybe, and that in 1 minute you can get a healthy noodle dish instead of having the Maggi mee. I would think so.
That's wonderful. So now back to you, Tanya, before we have to close the session. Kerala, what 5 ingredients define Kerala? And what one dish would you want to send to the world as the dish of Kerala across all its communities?
Well, I think definitely pepper, your red chili, ginger and garlic, of course, as spices. And I mean, the array of spices are way too many to mention. And I think otherwise rice, because we have various forms in which we make rice products or dishes. And if it's one dish, well, that's a tough question. But I think it would be my favorite, which is the prawn pada, which is made by my grandmother. It's not a very popular thing because not everybody made it, but it's very Portuguese influenced. It's made of a lot of red chili and vinegar and garlic. Yeah, it's more like a pickle, but you can have it as a very spicy curry as well.
So now, as we're coming to the end of this session, thank you both for being incredible sources of inspiration for all of us. As we live in a world that's deeply polarized, as people are calling themselves left and right, religious or non-religious, each of you has, Mohana, do you think the world is better if you're all shimmering stars that are all brilliant and accepted by one another, or should we be living in islands of sameness and questioning the other?
I think we should be living in the shimmering world with everybody around us, sharing. And I think food is one of the most important things for everybody around the world. If you can share and understand and appreciate everybody else's food, then I think that food is a very something that brings us all together, because we need it. We can't live without food.
Thank you. And Tanya, one little known fact about Kerala cuisine that unites the people of Kerala and can make the world come together just as easily.
Well, the variety and the versatility that one can find within food and the soul of food, I think Kerala is a fantastic example of how we've managed to live harmoniously and using food as a binding factor. And we're talking about centuries, not decades.
So there is hope for us to still find unity in diversity.
Of course.
Yes, very much so.
So both of you are saying yes. And so I think for us food people, food writers, lovers, food aficionados, we all agree that we'd rather live in a pluralistic society and a world, correct?
Absolutely.
So thank you, both of you, for making time this Sunday morning and joining us for this conversation on the soul of food and food for the soul. It has been an honor for me to get to know you both better. I hope everybody will buy your books and, more importantly, follow your philosophy of life and living. And with this, I am giving it back to our wonderful introductory host, Sanjoy Roy. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in to the Jaipur Literary Festival. And while online, it has only reached more and more people with both the deliciousness of words and the deliciousness of food, and how food unites us rather than divides us. And we've had Tanya and Mohana teach us that important lesson that freshness, deliciousness, taste, and food have no boundaries. So my thank you and gratitude to both of you.
Thank
And
you so
have a
much.
year ahead. Please,
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Sanjoy.
Thank you, Suvir, Saran. What an incredible group of people. We've been wanting so much to have Suvir and Tanya and Mohana together, and that's finally something we've achieved here. We'd love to have had you here in person, but hey, we have to wait for another year. We'd like to thank our celebration partner, Diageo, and thank you all for being a great audience. Do remember, you can also watch sessions at the Front Lawn, and of course, visit Amazon.in, order your books online, as well as Earth Fables. Please explore the incredible artistic craft that we've got together from across India. Do remember also, if possible, to contribute to keep us happy in body and soul to Teamwork Arts. Please tweet using hashtag Jaipur Literature Festival 2021 or tag at Jaipur LitFest. Meanwhile, keep safe, stay protected. The festival and all of us are protected by Dettol.